I just want to expand on some things I said in a recent video about psychopathy and address a couple of questions and comments. Now, as usual, there were a small number of people making condescending or passive aggressive remarks, and obviously they just get blocked and deleted. If you can't address the topic in a civil and respectful manner, and you're coming straight out with all these snarky remarks, then I gotta get you out of here. And then you get these people who wrongly assume that just because I have a boxing channel, the only thing in the world that I have any degree of knowledge or understanding of is boxing. They don't know me or know anything about me, but they make this bizarre and baseless assumption that I've never studied anything else in my entire life other than boxing. And again, those people get blocked as well. The reality is, I've studied a variety of things and have obtained a good deal of knowledge and understanding about multiple subjects. Some people are intimidated by this, of course. It makes them feel desperately insecure. So you get all the stick to boxing comments, which is another instant block. There was some guy on a recent video who said, "It's funny how Hatman's talking about VPNs when he has no idea how they work." Well, I'm not a tech guy, and I've never claimed to be. I've never studied tech in any great depth, and my knowledge of it is very limited. But what I do know is I can use a VPN to circumvent regional blocks on YouTube videos because I've been doing it for years. I also know that certain websites are inaccessible when my VPN is turned on. So obviously, technology exists that can block VPN users. And in the video, I said that I hope YouTube don't have the means or the desire to implement such technology for the Joshua Usyk rematch. That's literally all I said. But this weirdo felt the need to try and ridicule me for saying that. But as I said, these people are just desperately insecure attention seekers who are bitter and envious. Sad stuff. And the bad news is, your life's only going to get worse. So seek help. Anyway, in the video about the Daniel Dubois Don King situation, I mentioned the fact that there are many forensic psychologists, including Dr. Robert Hare, who are of the view that psychopaths are born, they're not made. And this is a view that I concur with. But I also mentioned the fact that there are other people who some refer to as proto-psychopaths. These are individuals who develop psychopathic behavior due to environmental factors, childhood trauma, and so on. The distinction being that a proto-psychopath is not a true psychopath. Therefore, in many instances, they can be successfully treated. Whereas with a pure or true psychopath, i.e. someone who is born that way, their condition is untreatable. In fact, Robert Hare and many other experts in the field will tell you that when you attempt to treat a psychopath, it actually makes them worse. Now, there was someone in the comments who was very civil and respectful, who said that he didn't think that the science was settled on psychopathy regarding nature versus nurture. And he's absolutely correct. The science isn't settled. There are psychologists who disagree with Dr. Robert Hare and his colleagues. So it's an ongoing debate. All I was saying is that based upon my research, I tend to think that Dr. Robert Hare is right. But on a side note, the whole concept of settled science, quote unquote, is unscientific in itself. Real science is never settled. It's a process of ongoing inquiry where all theories and paradigms are scrutinized in perpetuity. Settled science leads to dogma and stagnation, in which case it isn't really science at all. This settled science idea is often pushed by corporate and political entities in order to further their various agendas. If you've got billions of dollars to fund research or defund scientific research, then obviously you've got a big influence over what the scientific consensus is on certain issues. This is why a truly intelligent person will never take the consensus at face value. They'll do their own independent research. Now, of course, there will be many instances in which the consensus turns out to be correct, but there will also be many instances where the consensus is incorrect. The bottom line is, do your own research. Don't outsource your critical thinking to other people. Only sheep do that. You gotta be like a judge in court. A judge is not a medical doctor or an engineer or a scientist. But what he is, or what he's supposed to be, is someone who has enough intelligence and enough discernment to decide whether the prosecution's doctor is talking more sense or is more credible than the defense's doctor. Anyone who tries to dissuade you from thinking for yourself or even ridicules you for doing so is coming from a place of deep insecurity. So don't entertain these people. Anyway, getting back on topic. Whenever I talk about psychopathy, I always get people asking me whether I think various different people are psychopaths. For example, on the last video, one person asked whether I thought Eddie Hearn and Al Heyman were psychopaths. Well, psychopath is not a term that I just throw around willy-nilly. I don't know anywhere near enough about Eddie Hearn, personally or professionally, to tell you whether or not he's a psychopath. And Al Heyman has never even done an interview, as far as I'm aware. So it should be obvious that it's completely impossible for me to say whether or not he's a psychopath either. In over 12 years on YouTube, there's only one person in boxing who I've ever called a psychopath, and that's Don King. And that's not because he's the only one in boxing, nor is it because he's the most extreme psychopath in boxing necessarily. It's simply because he's the only person in boxing who I know enough about and who has exhibited enough classic psychopathic behavior over a number of decades for me to feel confident enough to come to that conclusion. And in no way am I trying to present this as a clinical diagnosis. This is just my opinion, but it's an opinion based on many years of research, observation, analysis, etc. I studied psychology in college back in the 1990s, and I've continued to study it for many years since as a subject of personal interest. I've read loads of books, watched many documentaries, and so on. I'm not a professional psychologist. I don't have a PhD in the subject, but I don't need one in order to have an informed opinion. Sigmund Freud, one of the most influential figures in the field, had no formal qualifications in psychology at all. The same goes for his nephew, Edward Bernays, who also had a tremendous understanding of human psychology and used it to mastermind advertising and propaganda campaigns for various public figures, corporations, and even governments. And again, he had no formal qualifications in the field. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Freud or Bernays here, but my point is, you don't need to be a PhD in order to have an informed opinion on any given subject or even be an expert on it. Just look at Jack Parsons in rocketry, right? Again, these are extreme examples, but I'm just using them to emphasize my point. Now, as far as boxing goes, Cus D'Amato, the famous trainer, for my money, was an expert in boxing psychology. And again, he had no formal qualifications in psychology, but he read a lot about psychology, I believe, and he had a certain aptitude for it. And when you combine that with his life experience, his experience as an amateur boxer and as a boxing coach, this allowed him to develop certain techniques to fortify the minds of his fighters. I seriously doubt that the average graduate coming out of uni with a 2-1 in sports psychology will be anywhere near as adept at understanding the mind of a fighter and training the mind of a fighter as Cus D'Amato was, because there's no substitute for experience and there's no substitute for aptitude either. Some people just have a natural talent for things, including psychology. Many psychopaths, in fact, develop a very good understanding of human psychology beyond that of the average person. This is what allows them to become so adept at manipulating people. Now, I'm generalizing here because not all psychopaths are equally adept, nor are they equally intelligent. But there are very few things more dangerous than an intelligent, academically qualified psychopath. Just think Harold Shipman, for example. And he only got caught because he got sloppy. How many Harold Shipmans didn't get caught? How many Harold Shipmans are there right now flying under the radar? You can never know. There was someone who left a comment that said that the ruling class contains a disproportionately large number of psychopaths. So they try and get academia to focus on psychopaths much lower down the socio-economic ladder, like drug dealers and gang members, etc. I thought that was a very astute point. But back to my original point, psychopaths generally have a good understanding of human psychology. In fact, you may not be consciously aware of it, but everybody studies psychology. Every single one of you. When someone gets dumped by their partner or loses someone close to them or suffers some other type of tragedy, you know they're likely to be thinking in a particular way and feeling certain emotions, and that their behavior may change accordingly. And the same applies if someone has experienced something positive, which they're very happy and excited about. Another example would be if someone's having their first ever boxing match. You understand through personal experience or observation that the person is likely to be feeling a certain amount of nerves or fear as a result of having doubts in their mind, being concerned about getting humiliated in front of a crowd of people, etc. So everyone is constantly studying human psychology. Again, either consciously or subconsciously. We all have to understand psychology to a certain level in order to function normally in society. And as I said, psychopaths often have a better understanding of the human mind than most people, including many qualified people. In fact, in Dr. Robert Hare's book, Without Conscience, he details several instances where he got bamboozled and outsmarted by a psychopath. And this is a psychopath who had no formal training or qualifications in psychology at all, but he managed to outsmart and manipulate a professional psychologist. And Robert Hare said that most of his colleagues have experienced the same thing. They've all at some point in their careers been taken in by a psychopath at least once. Now, back to boxing, Tyson Fury is a guy who understands psychology quite well. And he's very manipulative too. Now, I'm not saying that he's a psychopath. Not at all. I'm definitely not saying that he's a psychopath. But he has a better understanding of human psychology than most people, especially in a boxing context. In fact, sports psychologists actually study people like Tyson Fury and other elite sportsmen in order to learn what it is about their psychological makeup that makes them so good. So you've got sportsmen enlightening the psychologists about certain things. Now, generally, I've found that introspective people tend to understand psychology better than extrospective people. Just look at Carl Jung, for example. He was extremely introspective. That is how he developed such an advanced understanding of the human mind, not just from studying the minds of other people, but from constantly studying his own mind and his own behavior. Why do I think this way? Why do I have this fear or this desire or this prejudice or this ambition? Why did I react this way in that particular situation? Why did this other person react differently to me? What impact is this book or this film or this advert having on my psychological state? This is what is constantly going on in the minds of introspective people. And this process makes them more aware of the internal and external factors which color their perceptions and influence their behavior. And therefore, they can more easily see the things that influence other people's perceptions and behavior as well. Now, Sigmund Freud is another person whose work I rate highly, but he's fallen out of favor in many Western academic circles. His work is still held in very high regard in many places elsewhere in the world, but in the West, he's no longer flavor of the month and hasn't been for quite some time. Now, I definitely don't think that Freud was right about everything, obviously, but I think the reason he's being somewhat marginalized in the West is more to do with the fact that many of his views are incompatible with certain socio-political agendas that are being pushed in the West today. In other words, some of his views are incongruent with the political correctness which permeates modern academia. Anyway, I'll end it there. I talk a lot more about psychology and psychopathy on my Patreon. I've got a whole series on serial killers. I recently did a 2-part episode on Jimmy Savile. So if you're interested, sign up there. Otherwise, catch you guys on the next video. I'm out. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly. It's not politically correct. But that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and it's 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment. You can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.